Hi, everybody. This is great. I am so psyched because it's 3:30 in the afternoon. We've been going since what, 7 o'clock this morning, it seems. So give yourselves a round of applause. You're here. Yay! I'm really thrilled. Thank you so much. And I'm Pam Shadle-Fisher. I'm the Senior Director of External Engagement for the Governor's Highway Safety Association. I am thrilled to moderate this discussion this afternoon, and I really want to stress this. You have a wonderful panel here. These folks are fantastic. I've had the joy of working with them for the last couple of months as we prepared for this. But this is a discussion with all of us. You've heard over and over the last couple of days about collaboration. We are here today to learn from each other, to collaborate, to address this persistent but preventable issue of distracted driving. So it's going to take all of us. And we don't have all the answers, right? We have a lot of answers, maybe, but we need all of you to chime in today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the format in just a minute, but I want to do a couple of things real quick. First of all, I just want to say congratulations again to the award winners. Remind you all that one of the award winners, Impact Team Drivers, their focus is on distracted, reckless driving. So if you didn't get a chance to hear Kelly speak yesterday, definitely check out their website. I think that's important. The other thing is, let's be honest. Distraction is kind of the hot topic, the issue, but it's not new, right? It's really not new. As long as people have been driving, there has been distraction. There's that potential for the person behind the wheel to be focused on something else besides operating the vehicle. So eating, smoking, having a beverage, adjusting the mirror or the radio, talking to a passenger, focusing on something else, daydreaming, worrying. It takes our mind, it takes our focus off the road. I think you get the picture, right? I didn't mention cell phones, but we all know that's the huge problem too. But there's so many pieces to this distraction puzzle. So our focus this afternoon is, what do we do about it? We've been talking a lot about it. We need to move the needle for sure. So what's it going to take to change the culture, to make distracted driving as unacceptable as drunk driving, right? What's it going to take? And I don't like to make that, I'm not making a comparison as much as I'm saying that we know that we need to get the public to understand these are unacceptable behaviors and say, I will not do this. I won't do this anymore, and I'm going to call out other people that do it as well. So you see on the screen, we recently released a report with General Motors. We so appreciate their partnership in this effort, and it's really designed to help frame our discussion today. If you haven't looked at the report, I so strongly urge you to do so. It is loaded with information, with ideas, not only for the state highway safety offices, but for all of you out there who may be working with the states. You could be in engineering, you could be in enforcement, you're a planner, whatever you do, there's information in there for you. And it really does focus on this safe system approach that we're all talking about, that we all need to leverage and really move forward. There's multiple layers of protection addressed in here. We talk about engineering, education, enforcement, EMS, advocacy, all kinds of countermeasures. So we really need to focus on this if we're going to lessen the risk associated with this problem. And I want to say this as well. You heard Jonathan talking about it this morning and others in the session. We can't just enforce our way out of this problem. We can't just build our way out of this problem. We can't just educate our way out of this problem. It's going to take all those things working together to really move us forward if we're going to change the social norm. So I said I'd explain the format a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about the challenges that we identify in the report, because that does frame our discussion today. And you may or may not be surprised by what we're going to talk about in terms of the challenges. And then I'm going to invite each panel member. I'm going to introduce each panel member, and then I'm going to ask them to very briefly give us a little bit of a sense of what their organization is doing to help move the needle, to move us forward, right? And then we're going to start to talk. We're going to engage in discussion, and we want you to join in, right? This is between all of us. We're one big, happy little family here, and we need to share and talk with each other. And that's really important. So as we're talking, and I'm going to throw some things out to get us started, you hear something that's said by Ariel or John or Shana or whoever, and you think, I've got a thought, raise your hand. I've got several people. Jonathan's one, Jonathan and Adam. ready to bring the mic to you. And we are being webcast, folks. Hello to the audience out there in webcast land. We are being webcast, so we need you to use the microphone so they can hear you. That's very, very important, okay? So first thing I want to do, and let's see if I remember to, there we go. So we talk in the GHSA report about what's going on out there in terms of the behaviors, okay? The first section of the report kind of gets into some of those things, lots of research. We talk about driver attitudes, behaviors, laws, and so forth. The second section gets into some of the countermeasures, but it's really built upon the fact that we survey the state highway safety offices and tell us what are the top challenges you're facing to move the needle on this issue. And so you see the top 3 right up there, and they are in the order that they were given to us, okay? Disconnect between the driver's attitude about the danger of driving distracted and their actual behavior. And how many people have you heard say, yes, it's really dangerous, but I can do it safely, right? Right? Everybody else is the problem. I got it all figured out. Well, one of these days, they're going to be the person that didn't do it safely, and it's happening. Difficulty enforcing distracted driving laws that are on the books because they're either ambiguous or they don't have any law at all. We're hearing this. How many people have a hands-free law in their state? Okay. All right. How many people have laws that are confusing? Yeah, right? And we know that doesn't help. And our law enforcement partners out there, I know how frustrating this is to try to enforce ambiguous laws. It's a real challenge. So we need clear laws. We need strong laws. That sends a message. And then the other one was inadequate penalties associated with these laws. We need to make sure that these penalties send a strong message to the motoring public that this is not acceptable behavior. You know, so if it's a very minor penalty, what does that say? You know, what does that say? There are a couple others I want to point out as well, and we're going to dig into these too. We heard about a lack of data. Tell me, by a show of hands, how many of you have great distracted driving data? One, yeah, I know you do. We hope you share it with all of us, right? Luis is going to talk about that. It's a huge problem. And what do we need to do our work? We need data, right? So we need the data. We know that's really, really important. Lack of data, and we know that crashes involving distraction are grossly underreported. We have a lot of competing highway safety priorities. You know, think about it: distraction, impairment, speeding, seatbelt use, drowsy driving, and then we get into the user groups themselves. It's a huge challenge. How do we best use our resources to move the needle? So lots of competing priorities, and we need to make sure that this is in our highway safety plans, our strategic highway safety plans. There's a lack of funding, and there's restrictions on the use of some of the funds that we do receive. Not every state qualifies for distracted driving grant funds under 405. Okay, so there are real challenges here with this. And then we also heard about a lack of tools and resources, leadership, as well as partner support. And I can't overstate the leadership piece. The one thing I've always admired about our Howard Award winner today, Debbie Hersman, is she's clearly shown what it means to be a leader, to step up and say, we have to do this, and constantly be pushing people and cheering people on. We need that for distracted driving. All of these are really significant challenges, but I don't believe any of them are insurmountable. I really, really don't. So I ask you to think about this. I've asked our panelists to think about this. What is it going to take to change the culture? So distracted driving is socially unacceptable and no one does it. That's the question. That is the question. So we're going to start with our panel introductions, but I want to say, and you may have noticed someone's missing from our panel today. Jennifer Smith. Jennifer Smith was not able to be with us. Jennifer is the founder and CEO of StopDistractions.org, which does bring together survivor advocates and gives them the support and access to resources. Jennifer is at home. She's watching, and we wish her well. She's fighting illness, and she's trying to get better. And she is so important to all of us because she is one of those folks that is out there working tirelessly to pass hands-free laws in all 50 states, and truly has been a driving force in many state legislature in terms of the work that's been done. As I said, she's watching, and I'm going to ask you to join with me in showing your appreciation for Jennifer and her leadership and advocacy by giving her a round of applause. Jennifer, we love you. So let's start. You ready? I know you're all ready. You've been chomping at the bit. So I want to introduce our panelists. First, Nanda Srinivasan is NHTSA's Associate Administrator for Research and Program Development. You oversee 4 of the main offices that formulate, implement, and evaluate traffic safety to increase seatbelt use, right? To decrease impaired driving, which includes distraction. Distraction is a form of impairment. To improve the safety of vulnerable road users, and also to advance EMS. So Nanda, tell us about NHTSA's work in this area.
As with anything we see in traffic safety and in fact transportation, we start with data, the awareness that data gives us. As of this moment, right at this moment, 373,000, more than 373,000 drivers are out there who are distracted. Just think about that number, right? And that translates to about 54% of people between 18 to 34 who are distracted. The report points to that. It also then is quite unsurprising that leads to 15% of all crashes we see. Again, that leads to 3,142 deaths that we observed in 2020. 3,142 people killed because somebody was paying either inattention, as you said, or prolonged inattention, which becomes kind of what we call moving away from the primary activity of driving to something else, whether it's technology induced or else other things. So that's a big deal in terms of our efforts. To reduce that takes a whole traffic safety culture, right? We're going to talk about all the things we are doing in NHTSA to devise programs and projects that led us to get to zero. These would include awareness, which I talked about, that leads to action in terms of research or development and demonstration programs, which we'll talk about. And that leads to a lot of thinking about legislation, you mentioned that, and that leads to thinking about enforcement, education and training that follows, and collaboration, which is extremely essential for all our activities. Last night, I remarked that we have about 1,000 professionals who work on traffic safety in states and federal government alone. That's just us, behavioral safety. And you're talking about 350 plus million people in the country. So you need coalitions for this message that is in this room to become more mainstream national dialogue on all our aspects, including distraction. And finally, I think everything we do, we need to evaluate ourselves. And strong evaluation is part of that change process that helps us get better at what we do. So we will talk about that going forward. Thank you.
Fabulous, great. Thank you so much. John, you ready? John Capp is General Motors Director of Global Vehicle Safety Technology, Strategy, and Regulations. Does that all fit on a business card?
Not well.
You champion safety at GM, and you've played a really pivotal role in advancing your GM's active driver safety, active driver assist and active safety, automated driving and connected vehicle safety, as well as teen driver, which I'm familiar with. Also rear seat reminder and buckle to drive. They're all really tremendous features. So thinking about the work GM is doing, let's talk about that focus on distracted driving.
Thank you, Pam. Glad to be here. And so, we approach this problem like a lot of people do. It's a multifaceted issue. The talks we've been hearing here at the conference all talk about it's not one thing, it's chipping away, right, at various different approaches to solve these types of problems. So we tend to look at a lot of the safety problems as 3 prongs. You got the driver, you've got the environment, and then you got the vehicle, right? We build vehicles, so we play a role in this too. On the driver, we try to get engaged with programs like this, right? We partner with GHSA. You mentioned the distraction report, which really is comprehensive. We were really pleased to be able to sponsor that work getting done. It paints a really great picture, and it just reminds us that advocacy is going to be an important part of continuing to remind people that distracted driving is a problem. The environment, we're actively involved in legislative efforts as well, pushing for hands-free legislation and policies along those lines. And then, lastly, the vehicle. We have for years tried to design our in-vehicle systems to minimize distraction. I mean, we know people want to do things in their vehicle. They want to listen to music. They want to use their navigation system. And then along come, our little portable computers called phones. And, they do a lot of cool stuff. And people want to use those things too. And so we're trying to figure out, how to allow people to have the benefit from that computer and do some of the things that they want to do. But in a way that doesn't increase the distraction load. So we measure and assess how these devices get used. We integrate with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto into our vehicles so that it's more integrated. You don't have to touch the phone. Of course, voice functions and things like that. And so we just think it's a three-pronged approach, and we just keep hammering on it. And little by little, we're going to make progress.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Ariel Tabson is the Public Information Officer for the Tennessee Highway Safety Office, a role you've had since 2016, right? And you serve as the office's primary spokesperson. You work with the media to generate awareness about traffic safety and particularly this issue. You are the architect of Tennessee's distracted driving enforcement bus tour, which GHSA honored several years ago. And it's really, there's some cool stuff happening with that and a lot of other things you're going to share with us. So tell us a little bit about your focus at the Tennessee Highway Safety Office.
So my role primarily is media and communications, press, making sure that everybody has what they need as far as our grantees to be able to do their outreach and education into the communities. But my role has also evolved into a strong focus on partnership. And so I've learned that a lot of our campaigns, especially when you're wanting to implement them grassroots style and on a local level, requires significant effort when it comes to developing those relationships, maintaining them, and making sure that they're effective. So that's a lot of what I'm doing. So I'm very happy to be here and hopefully make some new partner friends.
Terrific. Welcome. We're really glad you're here. Shayna Finkel has been involved with Students Against Destructive Decisions or SAD since the age of 6. I'm not kidding, 6. I think I was playing with Barbie dolls and army soldiers in the backyard or something. I don't know. So what can I say? Those little green army men, remember we had a little garden in the backyard. We used to play with those, my brother and I. So you served as president of your high school SAD chapter in Tampa, Florida for 3 years, and then president of Florida SAD. And you are now, or I think you're the outgoing national president of SAD. Okay, so, and you are attending the University of Florida, you're a freshman, majoring in political science and also continuing your work in prevention. So I say this to Shayna and all the students that are here, you give me hope. You give me so much hope. Yes. So tell us a little bit about what SAD is doing to think about moving the needle on this issue.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to say thank you for having me, and it's an honor to be on this panel with such incredible people in traffic safety and be speaking with all of you today. But SAD is working extremely hard to engage our young people, and I'm so glad that I can bring the perspective of youth to this panel because I think it's so important to be involving our nation's youth in our conversations about many things, but distracted driving very much included in that. So we work tirelessly to create valuable, current, engaging resources for our nation's youth. And the way that we deliver that is through our hundreds of thousands of student leaders in SAD that we have in all 50 states across the nation. And with these resources, we are able to keep youth engaged in these very important and life-saving conversations in a way that's meaningful to them and makes them want to be involved and makes them have fun while learning these topics. And that's really important to us. And we do this because we have so many incredible partners and sponsors, including GHSA and NRSF and GM. We have our GM Scholars Program, which really just gives students the initiative to want to be part of these topics. So we love what we do here, and I'm glad that I can be here and share some of those resources with all of us here today. So thank you.
You're very welcome. It's great to have you. And last but certainly not least is Luis Calva. You are telematics marketing strategy lead at Nationwide, and you are helping Nationwide develop and promote usage-based insurance programs that reward drivers for driving safely. We all talk about incentivizing versus sanctioning. You're working on a new program for young drivers that will reward them for not using their phones. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that for sure. I know you're on our side. I had to say that. I had to say that. I couldn't help it, you know? I know you're on our side, but tell us a little bit more about Nationwide's focus on this problem.
Absolutely, yes. So Nationwide is tackling this effort in two fronts. One is the legislative side, as you know, and we've been talking about this for the last couple of days. You know, trying to enact these hands-free laws, and Nationwide has been at the forefront of those conversations in the states where we haven't passed those laws yet. But yeah, certainly, you know, usage-based insurance, we launched our first program about 10 years ago, and we've conducted a lot of research, and we know that there's another way in which we can influence this behavior, and that is through these incentives that consumers can get discounts through their insurance for safe driving. You know, when we first implemented it, we were using a device. You know, later as technology advanced, we started using an app, and of course, you know, an app is a perfect way to measure distracted driving. We have seen it's certainly a big issue, and more of an issue with younger drivers. As we know, you know, this is a generation that grew up with phones, and so, you know, it becomes something that just happens throughout the day. The need to be checking your phone. But what we have found in our research is that, you know, it starts with awareness, and then rewarding that good behavior. And we have seen this actually change ever since we implemented the measurement of distracted driving through, you know, phone use. We have seen a reduction just in that awareness. And so this is why we're going to launch a new program in the next couple of months that focuses all those efforts in younger drivers. Both customers and non-customers will be able to join this new program, and they'll be able to be rewarded for avoiding using their phones while driving. So
It's exciting. So both new and non-customers and customers.
that's right.
That's exciting. That's great. I love to hear that. Okay, so let's do it. Let's get into it. All right. And remember, audience, you're a part of this. You know, we don't want to just talk to each other. We want to talk with you, and we want you to talk with us. So this is really important. So I want to talk first about data. We talked a little bit about the data, the lack of data. It drives the work that we do in the Highway Safety Office. And I would say we've been on a quest for a good 20 years to get good data on this issue, data that focuses on prevalence and also risk. Okay, so I think that's important. So when we think about the lack of data, how it's shaped our approach, we've kind of hung back because we say we don't have the data. It hasn't been as much a priority issue. What do we do about it? And Nanda, I'm looking at you first, okay? I'm putting you in the hot seat, but then I'm gonna come to Luis and I'm gonna talk to Ariel as a user of data, and others jump in here, but let's start having the conversation.
If we start with data, the first piece of data we all look at is the FAST data, right? The National Center for Statistical Analysis regularly looks at all aspects of traffic safety. We are laser focused in NHTSA on data. However, when you look at distracted data, the data is only as good as it's reported in the reported form of data that comes to us. And here's where we need your help. And this is the first takeaway if you're a state GR, and that is look at the quality of the police crash reports when it comes to distracted data, how well it's identified, how it meets MUC standards. These are technicalities, but they make a huge difference in the awareness portion we talked about earlier on. So that's the first aspect of it. We really need to get a good handle on prevalence with respect to even fatalities and serious injuries. The second part of it is looking at prevalence overall and duration of prevalence. So there's research studies you could do on the duration and novel ways of doing that. We can talk about it when we talk about research, but really the data that you folks have in telematics and other places are really important in understanding the duration, prevalence, and also the kind of circumstances when that happens. What are people actually, drivers actually doing when they're not paying attention to the primary act of driving? And I think that's really essential to understand. We made some strides. I say that in terms of distracted driving data, we are entering a maturity phase. We know lots of data sources exist. We need to have those consistent data sources that tell us a reliable story that can then form the basis for all the other things I said.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about what you're collecting. And John, I know you folks also have a partnership with INREX. So you're collecting data, and there's other groups in the room that are doing this. So talk about the data. How did we help connect the data collectors with the states and others who need it.
Absolutely, yeah. So of course we've collected a lot of data on this, and we know how bad it is, right?
Yeah.
So I think you mentioned earlier, this is it should be as bad as drunk driving. And if you can imagine, I'll throw out some stats here. Whenever somebody is distracted by their phone use, their eyes are off the road for about an average of 6 seconds. If you're going 75 miles an hour, imagine the impact that could cause. So one aspect is awareness, and that's something that we're, obviously in our conversations with states to try to enact laws, we bring some of this data, we share it, so that we can, help push these laws to get passed. But also, again, on the consumer side, that awareness, it's amazing how much, what we learned is when somebody joins this program, they see the impact of their driving behavior, and they see what they're doing wrong, what they're doing right. It's amazing how we have, as humans, this need to do better, to score high. And so that pushes a little bit in the right, the behavior in the right way, but also, of course, the financial incentive. You're going to pay less if you're a safer driver.
Yeah.
And we have seen that actually makes a difference. So, of course, we're not in this alone. All insurers basically have now a program like this. So it's more about how we can all work together to convince more customers to join and make this a regular way in which you get insurance.
Right.
And I think that's one way in which we can get better.
And Aria, I'm going to follow up on that because I think it's important. How do we get more customers to join? What do you see as an opportunity as a communicator working for a highway safety office? What do you do with that little piece of information you just heard?
As far as, okay. Well, when you have private companies like insurance companies, for example, we as a government agency cannot influence the marketplace, right? So we have to be very careful not to promote somebody over the other. So we try to include as many partners as possible, so similar to Allstate, and allow them to be in the position to spread awareness, right? So that the information is coming directly from you to be able to offer what it is you want to customers. So my job is to make sure that this individual, along with the rest of us, are included and have a platform to express themselves. As far as crash data and accuracy, I know I have my phone, I'm taking notes, I'm not distracted, I promise. I'm so involved, so involved.
She is not distracted.
I am not. It's all here. So crash reporting for law enforcement can be difficult because it can be inconsistent as far as what they are reporting. I know for Tennessee, we have Tennessee's Integrated Traffic Analysis Network, which is spectacular, and they work very hard to continue to make things more efficient, right? But we know that when an officer makes that traffic stop, he may pull that individual over for failure to maintain lane or because they're showing irregular behaviors behind the wheel. So once they pull that person over, the distraction is what is indicating, right? But they may actually cite them for seatbelt violation. It could be impaired driving. It's often that there are other violations that maybe take precedent over distracted driving. So even though the distraction is involved, it's not necessarily being reported. And so you're getting more seatbelt violations and DUI than you are distracted driving. And there may not be an option on a form to be able to indicate that that was the leading factor in the crash. So what we rely on are our local agencies to be able to tell us what these social behaviors are in their area, because they know, because they're often being affected by a distracted driver. We have an LEL who was hit by a distracted driver while walking in a parking lot. So your officers and boots on the ground, they know the time of day, they know the location, they know the trouble intersections, they know the areas that are problematic. So, and I'll talk about this more later about partnerships. That's where you're going to get your intel. That's where you're going to get your information about your hot spots and where you need to be targeting enforcement to be able to include individuals like this to help with the press, help with the awareness, and be able to assist with education.
Good, very good. And I'm curious in the audience. Yeah, I see a hand up. I see, Candace, you have your hand up. Jump in here a second. I know you will, Candace. I can count on you.
So I was in a crash in Virginia a few years ago, and I was hit from behind, and the woman who caused the crash admitted that it was her fault and that she was distracted. And when the police came, after they pulled me out of the car, I informed the policeman that it was her fault, and she did too, and that she was distracted, and she agreed. But what he ticketed her for was following too closely. And I know this is an ongoing problem. So what I'd like to know, and I understand about not having the right form line to fill out on the forms, what can we do to get law enforcement to make this a priority, to ticket appropriately, to have the right forms? I mean, how can we get them to do that? Because that's the best way to get the data, let's face it.
So that would require a lot. Okay, so if you're looking statewide when you're wanting to do that type of enforcement, you need something that kind of everybody can play with. And for us, lack of due care, lack of the exercise of due care would be the violation that a lot of agencies would use, particularly because it's a heftier fine and it can umbrella different distracted driving behaviors. So there are certain categories that they can choose, and it's likely he chose following too closely because that was the closest option. But that would, I believe, take the agency to I guess, modify their forms. I'm not sure exactly. I don't want to give you misinformation.
We're going to get somebody to jump in on this in a second.
Yeah, anyone from?
Yeah.
So,
I know Mike's chomping at the bit.
There's a lot of factors that go into this. You're talking about training, really. The 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the country. Even if you taught distraction the same way across, you're going to take a lot of training before people understand distractions as important as you said. You started with as anything else that people do that is wrong and causes crashes and finally fatalities. So if you take that tack, you're talking about training and capacity building, a lot of technical assistance that needs to go into it. But there's also behind all this legislation, right?
Yeah.
And this whole set of how the legislation is interpreted by the law enforcement officers. So there's training from the states that is needed, from the local agencies that's needed, a whole lot of awareness. And this is why I said it goes back to traffic safety culture. If you're all talking about the same thing, then it becomes much easier to implement, and some of the confusion that you said might go away. But it's not just enforcement that will help us solve the problems. It's really important, but it's not the only thing that we could be doing.
Right. Michael, I know you want to get in here.
Thank you, and thank you to the panel members. Mike Hansen, State of Minnesota. You're exactly right about the culture change. That's where we need to go. But changing culture takes a long time. And then I'm sure there's a question somewhere in this comment, but for years, we've always looked at the gold standard of data, whether is that crash data. We're looking at stuff after the fact, whether it's VARS or our min crash system or whatever it happens to be. And coming from a law enforcement background, distracted driving enforcement is very difficult on a good day. And number two, investigating a crash that potentially involves distracted driving is exponentially more difficult. And cops are not going to tend to put something on a form unless they know that they can put their hand on the Bible and say, yeah, that's what caused this. And so it's underreported to a huge degree. So I guess my statement or the comment I'd like to hear from some of the panelists is we need to move beyond looking backwards at that historic data set. We need to leverage the technology that the cars and telematics can bring us to really give us an idea of the scope of the problem and help us to identify those countermeasures at work.
Amen. Luis,
Yeah,
I know he's
absolutely,
chomping at the bit too.
So I'm gonna jump back to the data, right? So today we can recognize somebody's driving impaired by their behavior on the road. That's immediately recognizable. We need to get there with distraction as well. So the reason why somebody's following too closely, maybe today it's not distracted driving, maybe tomorrow that can become distracted driving. So certainly we need to look at the data, and we need a lot of data. Speaking about crashes, we look at claims to look at, what impact behavior has on that bottom line. And so, yeah, I think in the future, the more data we have, the closer we can get to recognizing this type of behavior that you can see with the naked eye is indicative of distracted driving.
John's going to jump in here.
Yeah, I was just going to add too. I mean, a lot of problems, you can never have enough data, right? We want better data. We want to understand problems the best we can, but I think we have enough data on this one to know that it's a problem.
Right.
It's probably underreported. There's more we can do. It's that way with a lot of problems. But I think it's elevated enough. Look at the attention we have here today. Everybody knows it's a problem. We can work on it, right? And there's a lot of different ways. And we've talked about the crash data that exists. Yes, it can get better. The reporting can get better. We talked about collecting telematic data. Ariel talked about localized data in an area, and that gets a little bit to the partnership that you mentioned,
right,
Pam, with NREX doing data analytics, and General Motors has access to a lot of data on our vehicles, and partnering up with other sources. And maybe some of you got a chance to visit the booth that was upstairs here during the expo and learn a little bit about that to localize opportunities and things like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of data that's out there, and yes, we need more too.
And essentially, even with data, you're talking about using the data dynamically to help people change their behavior. So driver feedback, right?
Yeah.
We notice the countermeasures that work. Our research publication always talks about when people see that they're speeding and there's signs showing that, they slow down. Maybe there are ways, and there are ways. Some of the studies we've done show that, but we got to evaluate them. Is to show that this feedback loop that comes back to the driver, how effective is that in changing the behavior right away? So we may have tools here that we didn't have in the past that may help us think about dynamically using the data to reduce the effects of distraction.
Right. And I'm going to put my State Highway Safety Office hat on for a second. I did run one for a few years, so I learned a couple things. But I'm looking at it, and I think where Mike's going too, is that we want data now to show us the extent of the problem. And where are those hot spots? I know in Ohio, on the corridors, they have distracted driving corridors. They've identified these as roadways where they know they were able to see this, and they've been working with, Nationwide and some other groups to do this. But I think what we're looking for is data now to help us establish some locations where we can focus our resources. But I'm going to go back to the legislative issue that drives so much of this. If we're going to move the needle with legislators, then we need to be able to show them data from their constituency, their communities, that there's a problem, right? And I know you folks have been providing some of that data. GM has been providing some of that data to some of the groups that have been out there in states trying to move the needle. So we need to provide that data now to show, look how big this problem really is, not after we crash, but now. So how do we connect you, and I know there's other groups here, and we have groups that provide feedback. My friend out here is raising his hand on the feedback. We have other groups. So let's make sure, partnering, that you're all talking to each other to share those resources and data so that we can get to the legislatures. We can help law enforcement identify where to put their resources. I think that's where we're trying to go. Am I right, Mike? Or you tell me if I'm completely off base. Okay, that's where we're trying to go. I'm going to shift gears. We could talk about data forever. So I want to shift gears a little bit, but I want to get to this other piece about, the disconnect about how people feel about this problem, right? There is a real disconnect here. It's dangerous. No one should do it, but I'm okay. I got this, it's not me. I'm not the problem. So, thinking about this, how do we move the needle on this? What does the research tell us? And all of you are, some of you are doing research. What does the research tell us about, why people feel this way? And I want to hear the youth perspective on this too. How do we change that? How do we move the needle and really get them to think, oh my God, I am the problem and I got to stop. So who wants to start? Shayna, you want to start? All right.
Sure. Okay, so I think a big component here, and this is something that I talk about and think about a lot, but I think one of the big problems is it's really easy to forget that us here in prevention, we're in like this bubble, right? And it's sometimes hard to realize that there's actually people in this world that go to work every day and don't talk about seatbelts and don't talk about distracted driving, don't look at the crash reports that we look at. And it's hard to believe that, right? Because it's all that we do. But sometimes we have to remember that there is that out there. And the unfortunate part about this is they're not seeing what we see. They're not hearing what we hear. And I can at least speak for youth, but I'm pretty sure that it goes for all ages. Humans have this natural stubbornness, right? Where if I can't hear it, see it, smell it, taste it, it doesn't exist, right? And that's unfortunate, because it's unfortunate that it has to take something horrible to happen to a community for a community to start listening. And it's horrible that something horrible has to happen in a state for those legislatures and those lawmakers to start paying attention and turn their focus, right? And that's really frustrating. And if I can see that, I know that all of you can see that. So something that I can at least talk about that we do with youth and here at SAD is we really focus on that hands-on component where we can make situations that are almost like a simulation, make it seem like a reality so students are able to see what it looks like to be distracted, right? They're able to put on those impaired vision goggles and see what it looks like to complete simple tasks while being impaired, but they're not actually in that life-threatening situation. So one of the things at SAD that we have and a really amazing programming is we have our Text Less Live More program. And that's where we're talking about, it's our primary focus on digital dependency and talking about distracted driving. And a lot of things that we like to do with that is, for example, my old high school took a play on this where we had a health and safety fair and we incorporated topics from Text Less Live More and from SAD. And one of the things we did is we had these little like tricycle things, and we had students get on a tricycle in a big field, no cars around them, I promise. They had a helmet on, I promise, they were protected. And we had them do little distracting tasks. We had them hold a phone and try to drive straight or drive through cones while being distracted on this tricycle. And then we'd have the students get off and be like, oh my goodness, like I was going like 1 mile per hour. I can't imagine what it would be like if I was distracted going 75 miles per hour down the highway. And it's that connecting piece that's important here that I think that we miss, because we get that connection because we hear the stories and we see the statistics, but there's people outside this bubble that don't do that. So we in this field have to go outside of the bubble and bring that connecting component to everybody else.
Absolutely. Ariel and then Nanda, go ahead.
So many things to say. First, I would love, and honestly, I feel like this would just solve so much, is if adults were required to go do driver education whenever these violations are happening, mostly because of what she's saying is that adults, as they age, are not getting the updated information and education and experiences riding a tricycle with a cell phone. They're not getting that. And also when you're older and you feel that you know what you know because you've been doing this for so many years, there's a stubbornness. And we culturally do not force adults to seek education in this way because we don't provide it. So my thought is children. That's the most effective way to be able to reach parents when they are the ones holding the parents accountable. So we have the Ollie Otter program, for example, where Ollie will dress up like in his, his stuff, and they'll go do a presentation at a high school and teach about the hands-free law, no texting and driving, so that when the child's in the car, they can say, hey, mama, put your phone down. You're not supposed to have it. And also parents, if they're not changing their behavior, they are modeling problems for the future, modeling problems that we will have to deal with on the roadway in 20 years because they are setting horrible examples behind the wheel. So there's a lot of things that can be done. It's just a matter of the partnership, the coalition, the legal, all of it coming together.
Okay, Nanda.
That's a great point. The point that feedback in some form helps. That's another way of looking at it. But having said that, I think we need to analyze more as to what causes that distraction. We know distraction is there. We know that people are distracted. We know those numbers. But what happens? What is the cause underlying the symptom? And there you'll have to think about how much time do we spend as Americans on our roads? And the American Time Use Survey has a number, 55 minutes perhaps. But when was the last time you did something? If you did something for 1 hour, completely absorbed in it. I mean, I meditate, I tell you, 30 minutes, I lose it, right? So it's a pretty arduous task we've given ourselves. We've taken it for granted we are safe, right? We understand, we do it every day. We get up and do it every day. We put in thousands of miles on the vehicle. But understanding those underlying causes will take a lot of research. For example, some of the research we've been doing, even with ADS, is what does new technology do? Novel ways of, looking at distraction measures and the prevalence of distraction. That helps you think about what kind of countermeasures that will come back later. Recognizing the severity of the problems from a research perspective We've broken the countermeasures at work into separate chapters now. Drowsy driving is its own, distracted driving is its own. That shows the body of literature is growing. I think for researchers to recognize what people are doing, and this kind of conversation helps us get there, is the first step in us understanding. Then we have those campaigns. And when you talked about legislation before, what does legislation do? The first step in a legislation is to build public support. What does public support do? Build those discussions that begin the process of making people aware. So those kinds of making people aware of those research issues is the second step. And again, we'll talk about more on training and capacity building, especially for ourselves. Even professionals may not be aware of all the things that we could be doing on distracted driving that probably exists in the literature. So that's another thing. Use of best case studies, best examples that work. And I'm all ears on this, folks. If you have ideas, if you have things that have worked in the field, in a local area, anywhere, I'd like to hear about them so we can evaluate them. That's how the Click It or Ticket started. That's how all good things start. So it's not the wise people here telling you what we know. It's you sharing it with us, so we all grow as a body of literature.
Absolutely, John.
You know, Nanda just mentioned the Click It program. I think there's a lot of parallels to be drawn with campaigns of the past. Some of them took a long time. I actually remember when I was a co-op student, literally 35 years ago at the General Motors Tech Center, one of my first assignments was standing out at the gates counting seatbelt use. And we actually modeled it with employees, tried to figure out how to improve it, gave away incentives, put signs up, things like that. And some of the data was used to help some of the states, I think, with some of their programs. And, you know, we've gone from being it was in the low 20% at that time to 90% now, and yet we still know it's a big problem, right? We got ways to go with seatbelt use to get that other 10% because half of the fatalities are still unbelted. But this just tells us though we can chip away at it. We got to keep messaging it. Some of it's always going to be there, and we have to remind new people because people are living life, and they might hear it that morning on the radio, but they might not hear it the next morning, right? So we
absolutely. And I want to jump into that for a minute. And there's a couple people in the room I kind of teed up for this, but let's talk about the messaging and the campaigns and that work and how important it is. Most of what we heard when we did the survey of the states about, countermeasures that they were engaged in, we heard about some enforcement based on the fact that you had a law, but a lot of our states are saying we're out there messaging, we're doing some kind of an educational campaign. And we know education is critical to this. We need that, layered approach, right? When we talk about safe systems, but we need to think about what is effective. We need to evaluate these campaigns. I'm going to tee it up. John Nelson's in the room. I know he is. Missouri, the show me state, is been struggling with seatbelt use and phone use, right? Buckle up, phones down. That's the campaign. And I wanted John to talk a little bit about that because they've been at it for a while. They've learned some lessons, and other states are starting to adopt this program. Talk about it, John.
Sure. Yeah. So it's called Buckle Up, Phone Down. Just curious, by show of hands, who has heard of Buckle Up, Phone Down?
Yeah, a lot of people.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Dr. Harkey mentioned two things this morning that I think were really relevant with that. He talked about urgency and persistence. For us, the urgency was we don't have a primary seatbelt law, and then we don't have any kind of hands-free law. In fact, it's us in Montana. I think we're the only ones that don't prohibit you from texting and driving. So there was a sense of urgency, that we can't wait. We can't wait for the vehicle technology to get here that's going to eliminate that. But the bigger piece, I think, has just been the persistence. So we're in year 6 of the Buckle Up, Phone Down campaign. And I think that's one of the lessons learned is at the start, there's this initial excitement and climb and people get on board. We did this thing with people can take the pledge, and our first 5,000 pledges, came in pretty quick. But then you hit that lull, and it takes a lot of work to kind of get that second wind. But credit to our leaders, they stuck with it from the director on down and really continued to push that. And we've actually seen more gains in years 3, 4, and 5 than we saw in year 1, just because of that persistence and that willingness to keep pushing it. But that leadership is critical. I think the third thing I would add to the urgency and the persistency is that message recall. And I think you all spoke to this a little bit about most people in the world don't live in this world, right? So they don't hear those things. by keeping the message very simple. You know, it's two things: put on your seatbelt, put your phone down. Like, that's it. And so when people see that message or they hear that message, it's easy to comprehend, it's easy to grasp. And then when we layer on top of that marketing, and just be honest, we pour a lot of money into this. Okay, we market it a lot. There's a logo, there's commercials, there's giveaways, there's all sorts of things that we do with this to get that out there. But that allows them to recall that. And we are seeing some success in Missouri. So we did a recent survey about a year ago. 3 out of every 4 Missourians know what buckle up, phone down is. They've seen it, they've heard it somewhere. Our seatbelt use was 80% when we started. So we just got this year's results. We're at 89%. So that's a record high for us. It's been slow but steady. And then our distracted driving fatalities that are reported are trending down. Now we know there's a lot more out there than what's being reported. But I think that's the big thing is you can't start these things and, you know, give it 6 months and move on. It's sort of like, I like to think of like a college football coach. You know, he comes in, you got to give him time to build a staff, to recruit his own players, to implement his schemes. You got to give him 4 or 5 years before you can really evaluate whether or not it's been successful.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
and I will say Buckle Up Phone Down Day is October 21st if anybody wants to join
There
in.
you go. Kentucky, I believe it's Kentucky. If I'm wrong, Kentucky can correct me. I don't know if Jason's in the room. We have as part of this report, GM is also partnering with us. We awarded grants to 7 states to do projects focused on some of the recommendations in the report. And Kentucky is actually going to do some research on the potential of using this program in their state, which we really appreciate. I know NHTSA is going to evaluate this program. It's just getting started.
The Buckle Up Phone Down program
Yeah.
is being evaluated right now in 2 cities and we'll have results as soon as it's done. But that's an example again of something tried that we can then evaluate and then mainstream that across the country.
Absolutely. And I want Shana for 1 second just to jump in here on this evaluation piece. We all know this, but I don't think, you know, it's often an afterthought. How important is evaluation and what did you share with me?
Yeah, so I've kind of got 2 parts to this. So
Yeah.
I'm going to answer the first part you asked
All right.
first. So
All right.
evaluation is something that is so incredibly important. And I think that we all know what the word evaluation means, but like really dig deep in that meaning. I think one of the most astonishing things to me is when I watch a presentation on a new program that this organization, whatever organization is putting out, and then I raise my hand. Okay, so this is a program that's for students. Have you had anyone that's actually a student look at it? And then they're like, well, no, why would I do that? I have a PhD. I'm like, okay, but do you have a license that says you're under 21 until, you know, 2027 or whatever it is? And then they kind of like their eyes get really big, you know, and it's like, I'm not trying to be mean. I don't know about you, but I really don't like wasting my time, right? And so if you're going to put so much money and resources and time into something, why not have it be looked at and evaluated by focus groups or groups of what you're actually trying to direct that messaging to make sure that it's actually something that's going to be valuable and of use. You can't put out a program for students on, well, I don't know, what's a really old like social media platform? Like
Facebook is what my son
is
tells me.
MySpace on the App Store anymore? So you can't put out like a distracted driving program for teenagers on MySpace and then expect them to use it, you know? Like it's got to be something that's actually a resource to them. Then the second part that I wanted to add on that is, I know I say that and it sounds so discouraging, but I don't want that to sound discouraging. I want that to almost be of empowerment, that it's proof to you that what you're doing is worth your organization's well-earned money, time, resources. And what I shared with Pam before this session is I was actually asked at Chicago Lifesavers this year, and I was asked, okay, you just shared this program with us. Like, is it effective? Like, does it work? How do you know it works? And, you know, it was really hard for me at first because I was like, what do you mean does it work? Like, it took me back and I spent some time thinking about it, but my initial reaction was this, and I kind of wanted to share that with everybody here today. Evaluation is important, but it doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't worth it. It doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't working, because normally when somebody asks that question, They're looking for a quantity. They're looking for something to quantify that what you're doing is working. But we all know in prevention that you are probably may never see those that you are positively impacting, but you will always have a quantifiable variable for the people that you are not reaching. And that's really upsetting, but it's something that you have to remember. So for me, my response to that was, well, when I have a program and I get to sit in front of people and share it with them, or I get to watch my peers share it with them, I feel the effectiveness. Or when I go into an elementary school and I'm teaching kids a dance about seatbelts, and then they're so excited to go home and tell their parents, I'm feeling that effectiveness. And lastly, but certainly not least, when I have my own peers come up to me weeks after a presentation and say, hey, I found the courage to speak up to my driver and tell them to put their phone down, and that might have saved my life. Thank you. That is when you're feeling the effectiveness. So you don't need a number.
I have hope. I have hope.
What you're doing is effective.
She gives me hope. It's great. Ariel, I want to talk about, we want to talk about the bus program. I think this is important and what you guys have been able to do with this, because it's a law enforcement program, but it has generated so much awareness. And I think it's important to share some of that success and what you found and lessons learned too.
Absolutely. So to let everybody know what the bus tour is, it's pretty much finding a passenger vehicle. A bus is great because it's large and it takes up a lot of space and you can have more passengers on it. But the idea is to have law enforcement, county, city, and state on the bus, along with media and whatever partners you would like to include, to be able to spot for distracted driving. And the importance of having the press on there and the partners is to be able to give them the awareness, the firsthand experience, to be able to see what the driver behavior actually looks like, because law enforcement can see it because they're out and about doing it. But being able to have other individuals there, that helps them being able to go back and report out and share what they've learned. But it's also an opportunity for them to look and spot for violations. And then the officers on the bus will patrol, radio to patrol on the road. Usually motorcyclists are the most effective because they can weave through traffic to make those stops. And initially, we really focused on citation numbers because we thought that that would be quantifiable. But what we're seeing is that it's also really effective to treat those traffic stops as an awareness and education opportunity. So we'll take educational materials about the hands-free law and give them to the officers so that they can give them out and say, hey, this is your warning. This is what you need to pay attention to, yada, yada, be on your way. But also it's such a spectacle to see on the roadway because you have so many vehicles doing their thing that you can see people actually change their behavior, and the ones who ignore you, because they will, some of them, they will catch on to it and, you know, hands on the wheel. But then there have been times where we had a guy with a whole plate of food, no hands on the wheel, and we called it in for distracted driving. But by the time he got pulled over, he had thrown the whole thing out the window. So the captain on the bus said, hey, yeah, cite him for distraction and also littering. So by having that elevated point of view on the bus and being able to look down, you can see so much. And it's crazy because the most citations and violations we see is seatbelt use and children not being properly restrained. And we've also caught fugitives. We've been able to capture so much just by having this vehicle and everyone on it together, and also having the media being able to capture live the behaviors that are happening takes the liability off of us, because it's the press that is there reporting and saying, look, this is what's happening. And then it gives you, by having a photographer on the bus and who's also doing video, you have so much content that you can then repurpose, and you have actual examples of what these behaviors are, and you have photos of the massive amount of enforcement that's going into it. So it's something that, if it's planned well, coordinated well, it can be very effective. And it has been, I mean, we have one that's planned for the 28th of this month. That's what I was working on this morning, was helping to coordinate that. And it's just Tennessee Highway Patrol took it upon themselves, found 4 to 5 buses on their own. And I think 20 to 30 motorcyclists. and they're all going to gather up at Opry Mills and execute and get it done. And I've got to make sure that they've got press and the support advocacy of what they need. But it's something that is very easy, simple to do, but it also brings people together. And this is where I talk about partnership. You're forced to create a task force. You're forced to create a coalition. You have to communicate. You have to follow through. You have to show up. And this is something that if you continue to do it and if you are consistent, you will see changes in patterns of behavior. So I encourage everybody to try it. Reach out to me if you need any support, help, ideas, but it's a great way also to involve your partners, individuals like this, to give them a unique platform for them to be able to give out information or speak to the media, do whatever you need to do.
Okay, we got a comment or a question back here. I'm not sure. Go ahead.
A little bit of both.
Okay.
All right, I'm Jay Huber. I'm the Kentucky Motorcycle Rider Education Administrator. Motorcyclists by far are kind of impacted by distracted driving, especially cell phone use, exponentially to other vehicles. I see, tons and tons of resources going into whether it's the media campaigns, law enforcement side, the legal side, even the technological side from the car manufacturers, with GM and things. But the one partner that I see it's missing from all of these discussions is I don't see anybody from Apple or Google, the phone makers, their operating systems. I mean, there's the apps on the phone already that'll lock out portions of the, portions of the phone.
Yes.
Why are we not mandating or engaging in some form or fashion with the phone manufacturers to make that, part of their operating system where it's not an opt-in, but those features are, just built into the phone automatically.
That's a great point. We are doing a project on cell phone blocking technology right now. First thing you need to do is evaluate the research to make sure that works. And then you have to worry about a lot of other things, equity, other things that come into play. But cell phone blocking technology is extremely important for us to investigate in terms of finding what it does. When do people use it? Do people use it? Do people find innovative ways of switching it off and then continuing the behavior? So that's the first thing to do. The second thing is and this is going to the technology discussion. So we tend to think of technology as something other than us, but I think technology is part of the safety culture solution, right? Yeah. So many of the, as you said, many technological solutions are being contemplated, whether in the laboratory or various phases. I know there's several people here who are working on several pieces of technology, and this morning we saw an example of what technology can do. But I talked about driver feedback. Driver feedback is fantastic. We've seen that it works. We are working on that. That's probably the second generation. But down the lane, you're looking at a third generation of interaction with technology, where I think technology can help us correct some of the behaviors that we might get into. For example, you see movies where the robot helps people think about what they're doing. I went through a surgery where I think half the surgery was conducted by a robot, the other half was the doctor. So here's the driver driving, and then you have all these technologies which can, and I know at least one person in the room is very happy as I say this, at least which can drive by themselves. So what about that interaction and the ADAS interaction with the driver, going to the second generation of making the driver better and making the whole system, and this is where safe system approach and the National Roadway Safety Strategy comes in. The whole system approach, from the psychology of driving, from how we design our highways, to how the human beings interact with the design, human beings interact with the vehicles, and the vehicles in turn, technology, interacting back with us to make us safer. I presume to say this will not just make us safer with respect to distracted driving, but from a holistic perspective. A driver doesn't get up in the morning and think, I'm going to be distracted today, or I'm going to be impaired today. I don't think people think like that, but those are the silos we've drawn ourselves into. In order to get us out of that, we may have to think about the entire system and do that kind of background work. And we started with cell phone blocking technology, but I think we can mature into a more holistic think of what will happen tomorrow.
Absolutely. John, I want you to jump in here,
Yeah,
please.
that makes a great point that whether it's ADAS features or automation will play a role too, right? So that the vehicles are going to help anticipate things that are happening. They do that today. We have features like, automatic emergency braking that's already preventing over 40% rear end crashes. Somewhere in there were people that were distracted and the technology jumped in and helped out. Now, we don't want to be, counting on that.
Nope. Nope.
But this is, again, it's a multifaceted approach, and those technologies are helping, and automation, which is more, complete takeover by the robot for driving, will play a role as time goes on as well.
Right. I think that's important. And there's something that I'm looking at Russ Martin, because I see him down here, and he's our government affairs and legislative guru here. But thinking about, there is language in the new infrastructure bill for states to use some funding to focus on educating the public about ADAS, right? A lot of folks don't understand how these systems work. They turn them off in some cases. I have a next door neighbor who's been driving for years and says, I hate when my steering wheel shakes when I'm kind of moving out of the lane. I'm like, it's there to help you, David. I hate it. I hate it, right? So we need to educate people about this technology, because there is that, it is layered, it's that layered effect, right? And I think that's so important.
Mainly to not turn them off, Pam. Yeah,
Yeah, no, don't turn it off.
Customers don't need to be engineers and know how to do everything, but it's like a smoke detector, right? Just make sure it's got a battery and it will do its part and warn you. And,
Exactly.
And these features will do the same thing, but you gotta leave them on.
You have to turn on. I want to bring up one other question. I'm wondering if anybody else is thinking about this. Jonathan, I know that Riley's got a question here, I think up here, but let me just get this real quick. There's a lot of talk about, pushing buttons, touch screens and phones. I have a vehicle. It's not a GM, I'm sorry. It is a Volvo, but I have a vehicle that has they all have big screens now, right? They're big screens and everything is touch. There's some stuff on the steering wheel you can still control, but it's touch. And it can be distracting. I got to be honest with you. So when we think about the environment, the interior of the vehicle, I know you folks are talking about this every day. I've talked to Tricia about this with GM, but how do we really move the needle so that we can make this as simple as possible and less distracting? I mean, it's really a challenge.
It may seem like things are getting more complicated, but consumers are asking for more and more functions and have bigger screens and this and that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be harder to use, right? So we extend a lot of effort to the human factors to make sure that the things that you use frequently are right at your thumbs, and we have things like operating your cruise control and setting your setting for warnings, the gap distances, things like that, right on the steering wheel where you need them.
Yep.
Some of the things that you don't need to access very often, are maybe over embedded in the center stack, right? So a lot of care goes into that, making sure that they're nearby. The other thing is, we actually have a lab where we bring in outside participants, not employees, and try out some of these functions with new vehicles before they go on the market and try out our software. And we measure how long does it take you to turn on the HVAC system, how long does it take you to change a radio station, put in a destination in your nav, what have you. And we use that information to try to minimize those glance times, because we know that looking away from the road is probably the single biggest thing we need to control.
Absolutely, absolutely. Riley, I think you had a comment.
From the car manufacturing perspective, is it possible to have an ignition interlock device where the car will not turn on until a phone is placed in it or until a phone is turned off or put away?
Interesting.
Could it be developed? Sure. Well, there's a lot of challenges with, like we started talking at the beginning here. I mean, people have become somewhat dependent on all these great features that the devices do. Just a minute ago, Nanda was talking about, us looking at how well some of these programs are doing in the field. Part of that is making sure there's no unintended effects of these different programs. There's a lot of good that happens when people have, connectivity. It could be giving them route information. It could be warning them of emergencies or of icy roads ahead or fog or things like that too, right? We need to think about all those things.
I agree. It's interesting. It really is an interesting thing we have to focus on, but I'm going to go back. I got you, Jason. You're up next. Riley, I just want to stress this too. I mean, it goes back to what we were saying about the Apple and Samsung and everybody with these phones. You can turn your phone off. It's called an off switch. I've been saying that for years. I know that sounds so simplistic, right? But it is called the off switch. So how do we educate folks to simply say, I'm going to turn it off. I know we use it for a lot of things in our vehicles, potentially for directions and so forth. But we have to think about that. But there's also the I'm driving feature. Verizon, I have a Verizon, so I have that feature,
Works
right?
great.
And others, AT&T has a feature. There are these features. So, how much more can we talk about, again, through our education messages that we know you rely on them. They're important. They're important safety devices to have in our vehicles, but we can turn them off or we can put them in I'm driving mode. So think about that. Jason, jump in.
One follow-up on the turning off of the driver safety features in vehicles. Has it been considered for certain types of features, instead of allowing them to be turned off by the user in the settings, to require that to be done at say the dealership, where part of that is like an educational process to say, this is what this does, this is what it's for, are you really sure you want to opt out?
So, yeah, short answer is yes. From the time we started introducing some of these features, 10, 12 years ago is, when we really started to bring features like collision warning and lane departure warning in the vehicle, there was a lot of concern about consumers not liking, in particular, lane departure warning. And so, we made it easy for them to turn the feature on, turn the feature off. As time has gone on, the features have become better. Features are also become part of consumer metrics and other information that, and we're finding out how well some of these features work. I mentioned automatic emergency braking, lane keep assist. It's about 17% effective also in preventing road departure crashes. So as we get this information and we make the features better and better, and we find out what consumers like and don't like, we're revisiting some of those, and the default is changing to on in many cases. And some cases we're making it difficult to turn it off because we know that people don't really want to turn it off anyways, like side blind zone. Nobody really wants to turn that feature off. Well, that one's over in the menus because it's pretty unlikely anybody's going to want to turn it off.
Right. Another thought here that I want to throw out to the group, I'm shifting gears quite a bit, but I want to throw out the idea that, and we say this in the report, that do we need a national organization that is our MAD for distracted driving? Do we need that? Why is it too late, Candace? Hang on. We got to get a microphone to you. Hold on. Yes, we do, because this is being webcast. This is being webcast. We have to be fair to our audience out there in internet land.
So I have been meeting with a number of the distracted driving groups over the years, where they've brought me in, had me sit down, talk about how they could do what I did, and still do to some degree.
Sure.
And I've sat there and explained to them they need a leader, they need one name, they need to all work together. I've been telling them this for years. Have you seen them do it?
Not yet.
No, and they probably won't, because, and this is nothing against them personally, because they do a fabulous job at what they do. But I have found, after working in this field for 40 years, groups tend to become very territorial. And, and aren't always willing to work with others and cooperate and follow others. And it's real hard if you don't have a leader from the beginning to all of a sudden pick one of these wonderful people who have been doing this as a leader that everybody's going to follow. It's just too late.
Okay.
And as much as leadership is extremely important, as you noted, following is just as important as leadership in getting a band of followers, as you noted in your career. But it also points to the importance of coalition building.
Yes.
Coalitions, building that collaborative element. To all of you at GHSA, our NHTSA regional administrators are more than happy to assist technical assistance on distracted driving or any of the other priorities. But building that collaborative instrument is going to be vital, not just for distracted driving, but for all other things we do. In terms of that, we have some opportunities. For example, NHTSA has a arrangement with NETS. We work with NETS, especially because the work trip apparently has more distractive elements associated with it, because many times those distraction elements are work-related calls, are things that are happening from work. So here's something that some of us have taken back home. We have a distracted driving policy within DOT for our employees. We give them periodic training. I know all of us who are DOT employees have taken that. That kind of reinforces that you're not expected, you're not allowed to drive distracted when you're at least with the government, you're working with the government or with your employer. But going back from that is we have a National Distracted Driving Coalition. We sit on the steering committee. We have a national plan of action there. But there are lots of things that you could be doing on the way to being a MAD. And that's something to think about as you contemplate a national organization.
Absolutely. I want to ask you as someone who works for a large organization, a large company, what's your internal policy for your employees on this issue? You're very committed to this issue. You want your insured to put down their phones and be safe. So what's your, I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit.
Well, I can tell you that it's an unacceptable. I mean, no, seriously.
My asking you that, or the fact that you have a policy?
No, I mean,
I'm teasing.
I don't know that there's a written policy, but just as it would be unacceptable for one of our employees to get a DUI,
right,
it would be equally unacceptable for somebody to. So I don't know who's going to be the first, but I'm
right,
sure that's when we
okay,
for the policy. But no, seriously, I mean, Nationwide is very committed on this issue. And so although there isn't a written policy, it's unwritten.
It's in the culture.
Yeah, it is in the culture.
Okay,
Yeah.
It's in the culture. Last word, Shane, on this.
Yeah, but I also wanted to remind us though, because I know for most of this, we have been talking about technology and that being the component that's like mainly focused on with distractions. But I want to remind us that is only one part of distractions. There's visual, there's cognitive, there's audio, there's manual. There are so many types of distractions that we haven't even thought of yet because we don't have statistics on that. Because let's talk about mental health, right? You have no idea what's going on with someone's mental health. There's no way to, again, quantify that. There's no way you can show that in a crash report that as that being the cause of the crash, right? So I just wanted to add that in, that there's so much more than just the technology, and that's important to remember.
I appreciate that very much. You're right. There's lots of forms of distraction, and we have to keep that in mind. We're getting close to the top of the hour, and you've been a wonderful audience. You've been very patient because I know it's been a really, really long day. So I appreciate, you all being here and sticking with us. I want to thank you all for your insights, giving folks some ideas to chew on. They gave us, all of you, some ideas to chew on as well, some things to think about. We will all be together tonight for the Taste of the State reception at the Ali Center. So I encourage you to keep the discussion going. If you think about something that we didn't talk about, I'd love to hear about it. I think all of us would as well. I think that's important. So I want to ask first for you to thank the panelists for their time.